Welcome back, everybody. We got another pair of task sheets for today. We got one more for tomorrow, and then Wednesday we'll have our tests and everything. Today we've got task sheet 391 and task sheet 667. 391 is talking about oil consumption and like smoke coming out of your exhaust, all that kind of thing. There's not a lot I can do with that here. So this is going to be kind of an all data exercise on that one. Pull up your vehicle, or you can use mine if you want, and look around in all data and see if you can find maybe some testing procedures, things like that for oil consumption, or blue smoke coming out of your exhaust, something like that. Again, my truck, if you want to use it, is a 99 GMC Sierra 2500 with a 5.3 liter V8. So see what you can come up with for that. For task sheet 667, we're going to work through a check engine light with a EGR concern. So we'll go over to the truck here and get started on that. So we are over at the truck. I just want to show you guys the EGR system itself real quick before we get into tracking down this code. So on this truck, it is this valve right here. We've got a metal pipe from our exhaust manifold that goes to the bottom of the valve. So that is where we get our exhaust from, just the manifold on this one side. And then we have another pipe that goes into our intake manifold. So our EGR gases go into the manifold and they just get distributed through the manifold itself. I believe we've got like 5 wires going to this thing. We're gonna have a couple for moving the valve itself, and then we're going to have 3 wires for a position sensor, because the PCM is going to want to know where this thing's at, so it knows how far open it is. These valves aren't open and closed. We can they're pulse width modulated, so we can hit a percentage of on for these. So you may be driving down the road and it's commanded on only like 30% or something. It's just going to depend on the driving conditions. So it's right up here on top, pretty easy to work with. Other vehicles may have this in a different place, but it's going to need to connect to the exhaust somehow. So that's kind of what you're going to be looking for. But these valves are all fairly similar. It's like a big round solenoid, so they're usually pretty easy to spot. But we'll go back over here to the scan tool real quick and see what we're working with here. So this is our main menu of our vehicle. I have the vehicle built out instead of using the generic functions, but we're going to pull up codes. We're going to display codes, engine and transmission trouble code information. So I do have a lot of codes in here from doing all these different task sheets from these classes, but P0404 is what we're looking at on our EGR system. So it's an EGR feedback signal out of range. So we need to go to all data and pull up that code and take a look, see what we're dealing with. So here's our trouble chart for P0404. This is EGR open position performance. So it does call it out a little different than it does in the scan tool, but that's fine. These older charts are pretty straightforward. You start at step 1 and it's just going to ask you yes or no questions really, and as you work through this chart. It's got a column for values if there's a spec or something that you need, or a number you need to hit, something like that. Most of these charts are going to start, at least with General Motors, are going to start with this OBD system check. We kind of skip over that a little bit because it's good information to know and it's good to do, but that's going to be things like checking for blown fuses and visual inspections and pulling codes and things like that. So it's kind of things that we may already be doing just as part of our normal diagnostics, but it's not really realistic to go to the fuse box and test every single fuse for every problem that you have. So sometimes you might want to do that, but realistically, that's something you're probably not going to do every single time. That's just you're going to end up wasting a little bit of time. But so on this, we're going to start with Step 2, it wants us to idle the engine and command the EGR valve to 50% with a scan tool and kind of see what happens. So we'll move over to the truck here and see what this thing does. So we're back at our main menu. We've got the truck running. So we're going to go into functional tests. We're going to go into output controls. And we've got our EGR percent on the top right here. That's what we're looking for, so we can command this thing on and off if we need to. So it'll give us some data to go along with this as usual, but what the chart wants us to do is to command this thing to 50% and see if the engine runs rough or dies. So it's looking for that exhaust gas coming through the valve. So we're going to open this thing up, it's going to kind of choke it out at idle a little bit. So it's wanting to see if this thing will actually do anything. So we've got that turned up to 50 and we have zero change whatsoever. So we've got something going on here. I don't know if it gives us any EGR data in here. So it kicked us out. Some of these things will have a 30-second or however long of a timer before it kind of kicks you out, so you don't end up damaging something by commanding it on or off for too long. So we know that we didn't get any rough running or anything like that. It didn't stall. It didn't change anything at all. So we're going to go to the next step on our chart and see what happens. So our next step wants us to go to our EGR control circuit, put a test light on it, and then we're going to command the valve to 100% and see on our test light if it lights up. So this is testing for power to the valve and control from the PCM. This circuit's fairly straightforward. Over here on the right, we've got our control circuit and the ground, and then these 3 wires on the left are for our position sensor that's built into the valve. So really what they're going to do first is have us test the power and then the ground circuit. So I mean, if you guys kind of know how the system works, you can kind of skip around a little bit. So I always like to take a really good look at the wiring diagrams of anything that I'm working on, and most of the time I just kind of do my own tests based off of the wiring diagrams. Now, starting out, it's probably going to be more important to stick a little closer to the chart for the code. But as you go and you get to know these circuits a little bit more, and you get to know kind of what these tests are looking for when we're testing a circuit, we can kind of just do things our own way, still come to the same conclusion and save ourselves a bunch of time. So that just kind of comes with experience of doing this kind of stuff. But again, this is a pretty straightforward circuit. We don't have any extra connectors in our circuit anywhere. If we did, you can see we'd have a symbol like this somewhere. So this means that this circuit for our vent solenoid goes through another connector. So that's another point for failure. We could have terminal issues in there, maybe corrosion or something. But our EGR circuit is just straight wired to the PCM. So we're going to go to the control circuit, which is the red wire. We're going to go there on our valve and command this thing on and see what we have. I'm going to get this terminal test probe that we've been using. I'm going to get that hooked up and we'll see what we got here. So we're looking for the red wire. Looks like the first pin in the connector, and we can determine that from the wiring diagram also. So this should have pin locations on the diagram itself. It may be ABC 1, 2, 3, something like that, but usually we can use that to figure things out. So I've got our probe in there and our test light hooked up. So we're going to go into our same EGR percentage command that we were using before. We're going to start. I'm going to crank this thing to 100. So I don't have anything on my test light, but I think I made a mistake that you're probably going to make in the future. I don't believe that the key is turned on right now. So I'm having a few issues with this, and I've had some similar things kind of happen before, but for some reason I'm not getting any control out of my scan tool. I don't know if it's because we got locked out earlier or not. Sometimes I've had issues getting a test to run a second time after it's locked out once. Sometimes you got to turn all this stuff off and let it sit for a while before it'll let you have control again. This isn't lighting up my test light at all. I hooked a meter up to it. We do have 12.26 volts. We do have battery voltage at our EGR, but it's not giving me the control. We can't open this up to 100%, but we do have 12 volts there. We do know that that wire is going to be good then, coming from our PCM. Honestly, if I didn't know what problem I had put into this thing, and we just kept following along with our chart based on our results, we're going to end up in the wrong spot. It would end up having us put a PCM in this thing with it not needing that, and we'd end up with the same problem that we started off with. So sometimes you got to check and double check a couple of things, because these tests don't always run the way that they're supposed to. So we do have 12 volts at our valve, so we're going to move on to the next step. For our next step, it wants us to take our test light again. Instead of hooking this to ground, we're going to hook it to power. And we do have some voltage there. So we are going to probe our ground circuit and see if our test light lights up. So we're going to pull this out, and we're going to hook our test light to the white wire is the ground. So our white wire is pin A. It should be all the way over here on the end. So I'm getting ground through this pin right next to it, pin B, which is our sensor ground. So we know our test light and everything's working. Pin A, I don't have anything at all. So typically when we don't find what we're looking for on a particular wire, we need to go and run the thing out end to end and see what's going on. So we're gonna go to the PCM now. We're gonna use our meter set to the ohm scale, and we're gonna check for continuity from our PCM over here all the way to our valve. So I'm gonna look at our service information and figure out what pin that I need to go to, and we will see what that wire looks like. So to figure out where we need to go at our PCM, we can look at our wiring diagram down here at the bottom. So we've got our PCM, we've got C2 with a line between these two guys right here. We've got C1 with a line through all three of those. So that means all these pins are in connector 1, and these pins are in connector 2. So we need to go to our C2 pin 41. Now these PCM connectors have quite a bit of wires going to them. So what I usually like to do is come over here. If you go into where your electrical diagrams are, there's going to be a spot that says connector end views. And that's what this is. And these are very helpful locating wires in these big connectors. So you're not necessarily always really sure where what pin is, which one is number 1, where do I start counting. Go to these connector views and it will help out quite a bit. So we're looking for pin 41. It's a white wire, and you see it says our EGR solenoid ground. So it is the top pin on the left. So we will go to our PCM and we'll run out that wire and see what it looks like. So I've got my connector 2 disconnected at the PCM. These ones aren't too bad as far as finding the right pins. On the back sides of here, they've got numbers made into the connectors so you can kind of tell what's going on, but that's not real super common anymore. So using the diagrams and the connector end views may be a little bit more important on newer stuff. But we're still looking for pin 41, a white wire, which is this wire right here. So we are going to put our test probe in there. Just remember, you guys don't want to be jamming random stuff in these connectors, because you can damage those pins. So we got this hooked up. We'll get our meter lead hooked to that. Remember, when we're testing continuity on things, we want to make sure that our probes or our meter leads aren't touching off on anything metal where we can accidentally get a reading that we don't want to get. So I've got my meter here, and I'll get hooked up on the other side. So this was the white wire, pin A. So let's see here. Turn our meter on. So we don't have any continuity on this wire at all. So what we're looking at is a bad ground wire on this circuit. So that's why we're not getting the control when we try to command this thing, and that's why it's set in the code to begin with. So we can't operate this valve without a ground. Now, going forward, there's a couple things that you can do. It just depends on, what everybody else wants to do. So in this situation, a lot of times it's easier and more cost-effective, more quick than actually trying to trace down the broken wire, or maybe it's rubbed through somewhere. Instead of doing that, a lot of times what we'll do is come right by this connector, and then we'll come right outside the PCM and we'll clip those wires, and we'll run a whole new ground circuit. Especially in this particular instance, this ground goes straight from the valve to the PCM, and it doesn't run anything else, so we can just eliminate whatever's in the harness and run our own ground. I'd certainly make sure service advisors and customers are aware of what you're doing before you go ahead and do that, but it'll save you some time having to dig through these harnesses and find the actual little bad spot. But just keep in mind things like open circuits. They can be kind of hard to track down if you're trying to find the actual spot. Sometimes on these connectors you may get a break inside of the insulation right by the connector. Sometimes you'll give these wires a little bit of pull, and you can see the rubber start to stretch because there's no strands connected on the inside. But like I said, those can be kind of tricky to track down. But get those sheets filled out the best that you can, and we will have one more for tomorrow, and then we'll have our testing on Wednesday. So thanks again, and we will talk to you tomorrow.